Well, and to show that Mr. Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, is serious about peace talks, he has halted terror stipends to Hamas ex-inmates. Since U.S. President Donald Trump's visit and, of course, pressure from Israel, Mr. Abbas has been forced to show that he is serious. You know, a couple days ago it was reported that U.S. President Donald Trump came into a meeting when he was in Israel visiting and basically yelled at Mr. Abbas for lying to him, indicating that he did not support terrorism nor teach anti-Israel education in the school systems. Well, of course, that kind of caused Mr. Abbas to jump a bit back, and the whole room was said to be shocked. But simply put, this is what's going to have to take in order for this peace process to go forward and to stay on course. Well, the bottom line is, with all the previous administrations, they pretty much walked around like a babysitter and was afraid to do anything that might upset anyone. But that doesn't seem to be the case with Mr. Trump. He's putting the pressure on everybody in the region, including the big players in the Arab League. But before I go on to that, the bottom line is that this seems to be sobering up many in the Middle East as to the fact that peace must come. And one thing I need to say to those who are Christians, you know, I had somebody write me the other day and say that they didn't want to see the land for peace swaps between Israel and the Palestinians. Well, frankly, under other circumstances, neither would I. But the bottom line is that prophecy must go forward. The Bible says in Daniel 9:27 that there will be a covenant that is confirmed. And like I said, whether you call it peace or a covenant, whichever you prefer, there's going to be some type of agreement that's going to take place. And the Bible says that it will last for 7 years, or at least it will be slated to last for 7 years. So at some point in time, it's going to happen. Whether it happens now or sometime in the near future under another administration. You know, the Bible, as I said, in Daniel 9:25-27, indicates that it would be under the leadership of the revised Roman Empire. And that is basically the modern-day European Union. But as I've said many times, I don't care who does this peace accord, whether it be Trump, whether it be some European leader, or whatever the case may be. The Bible says that at some point in time, it's going to take place. And I'm sure there will be a lot of pushback by the Palestinians and those who are ex-Hamas inmates. And we'll have to keep an eye on it and see if Mr. Abbas does renege and does start making payments again. But this is certainly something that I did not expect, and I think that we can take this as a sign that Mr. Abbas may be being forced into being serious. But here's another article I also wanted to key on. It says that 5 Arab states break ties with Qatar, complicating U.S. coalition building. And here's what the article says. It says Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and 3 other Arab countries severed all ties with Qatar early Monday in a renewal of a 4-year effort to isolate it and in a sign of a new boldness after a visit to the region by President Trump. And in essence, Mr. Trump has put the clamps down on anyone who is even remotely supporting Iran or even in any way in their corner. And that just happens to be Qatar. And going on with the article, it says Qatar, like other monarchies in the Persian Gulf, is a close ally of Washington, and it hosts a major American military base that commands the United States-led air command or campaign against the Islamic State. As such, the feud among regional allies threatens to stress the operations of the American-led coalition and complicate efforts in the region to confront Iran, but could also be a heavy blow to Tehran's regional ambitions if Qatar is forced to sever ties. The severing of all connections by Bahrain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen created an immediate crisis for Qatar. Qatari diplomats were given 48 hours to leave their posts in Bahrain, which Qatar citizens were allotted 2 weeks to depart Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. And on top of that, Qatar is a very small country that depends on all of its food from other countries. In fact, 40% of its food comes directly from Saudi Arabia, so this is a major blow. Now, the article says that it wasn't immediately clear why these 5 countries had decided to take this action now, But many are blaming it on the United States and Mr. Trump's recent visit for lighting a fire under the Saudi leadership. So these are two major moves that I would call somewhat prophetic because of the fact that it could lead to the peace with many. Now we'll have to wait and see how Qatar reacts to this and see if they decide to cut ties with Iran and to get in line with not supporting terrorism. And that's really one of the big reasons that they said that they cut ties with Qatar was because they were supporting ties with terrorist groups such as Hamas and the Islamic State and the Muslim Brotherhood as well. So since the Trump administration's visit to the Middle East, many other countries have taken on pro-Trump stances in fighting terrorism and getting in line with what could possibly lead to a regional peace. And speaking of regional peace, Nikki Haley came out and said that the upcoming embassy location will be a part of the peace process. So if and when peace does come, and I believe it will be sooner than later, this will be somewhat of a prize for both Palestinians and Israelis if in fact they do bring peace. Now I certainly don't know how the temple is going to be rebuilt from this process, but I assume it will be in that process. I just don't know how it's going to get on the Temple Mount. But that may not be the case. It may not end up on the Temple Mount. It may end up in another area, but the temple is still the temple. And frankly, I think that it would cause a major uproar in the peace process if, in fact, the United States did allow Israel to build on the Temple Mount in some way. But we'll have to wait and see how that comes about. We do know that at some point in time a temple will be rebuilt. Whether or not it will end up on the Temple Mount, who knows. But before I leave, this is an article I also wanted to bring to your attention. It's from the Jerusalem Post. It's entitled 5 Reasons Why Israel Should Care About the Qatar Crisis. And I'm just going to give you the 5 reasons. I may elaborate on some, but it says, number 1, it hurts Hamas. Not only are some of Hamas's leaders, exiled leaders in Qatar, but it also provided some financial support. So this is going to be a big blow to Hamas. Second reason why we should pay attention to it is it brings Israel closer to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Gulf. And this is what this peace accord, I believe, will end up being. With this covenant with many explained in Daniel 9:27, I think ultimately this will be what will bring Israel closer to the Arab countries and ultimately the Arab League. Number 3, it shows U.S. influence is back in the region. Of course, we lost a lot of influence back when Mr. Barack Obama was president. And as you can see from some of the moves that are going on right now between the Arab states, Qatar, and a few others, and Israel as well, that the U.S. has a lot of clout. And I think Mr. Trump is not pulling any punches and saying, listen, we're going to get this peace accord done. And it's certainly going to be interesting how they do it. Well, number 4 says that it delegitimizes terror. And the Middle East has always been a hotbed for terror that's sprung out into all other countries. And many of the countries that have taken in Islamic terrorists and have labeled them as immigrants now are coming to terms with how silly that really is. And now the wall that Mr. Trump wants to build doesn't seem so silly. And the travel ban that Mr. Trump is having to fight for every inch of is no longer something that people are laughing about anymore. And that goes for Europe, and that goes for the rest of the known world for that matter. And we have to look no further than what's happening in the UK, who has been a hotbed for allowing Islamic terrorists to stay in their country. And now the Gulf nations are becoming aware as to what is going on. And when I say aware, they've always been supporters of terrorism as well. But they're now realizing that it's coming home to bite them. And last, number 5, it says it bolsters Israel's hand in general and Israel's current government in particular. And I'll go and I'll read a little bit of that. It says Israel benefits when it is not the center of attention and certainly when it is not under pressure. This is a boon for the current government because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long spoken about working towards quietly cultivating regional relationships beyond Egypt and Jordan that stretch to the Gulf. He has spoken about the Iranian threat for 2 decades. If the Arab states are more concerned with Iran and Qatar than with the Palestinians, that takes pressure off of Israel at a time when Palestinians are trying to remind the region that they are facing 50 years of living under Israel's military rule. Over the years, Israel has gone from being seen as the center of the region's problems to today, when the Palestinian issue is dwarfed by larger conflicts in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Libya, and now in the Gulf. That plays into Netanyahu's narrative and takes the wind out of any sails that popped up 50 years since 1967 would have some sort of jarring effect. Now, certainly this will have some blowback because voices in the region will accuse the Gulf and Saudi of working for Israel. Syria and Iran already accuse them of working with Israel, which frankly put, they are working with Israel. But certainly that doesn't make them friends. That does make them cooperative regional neighbors, but there's no friendship involved. It's almost as if enemies are working together in order to combat a bigger threat, which is Iran. So we'll have to continue to see how this peace process is working, and if in fact things do move forward, or if they come to a stalled standstill in the very near future like all the others have. But so far I do see different results coming out of the visit in the region and with the leaders in principle. But really right now it's too early to determine whether or not this is going to go forward. But I do see the fact that if it's true that Mr. Trump yelling at Palestinian President Abbas for basically lying to him, I see that as a positive. And it appears as though Mr. Trump is not allowing anyone to get off the hook. So let's keep an eye on this and let's see exactly the way it's going to land. And if you don't know the Lord, today is the day of salvation. Don't put it off. 150,000 people will die today. The Bible says the vast majority of them will end up in a burning hell. Don't let that happen to you. Come to the Lord, ask Him to save you, and from this day forward, live for Him. And you Christians, I would advise you to get a copy of my Tribulation Period Survival Guide. There are two versions out there. I have one that is a digital version. It is written in nine different languages. You can download that and get that to your friend or loved one. But the one I suggest is that you get the paperback version, same book, just an English version of that you can purchase, but you can hand it to your lost loved one. And who knows, they may read this book and get saved before they need to use it during the tribulation period, or better yet, before they die. So I encourage you to make this purchase or make this download, but please get this in the hands of every lost loved one that you have. I would suggest that you purchase multiple copies so you can give them out to those in your family. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.